started. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for Ms. Jan Gates.
Well, I always have slides because otherwise I get off topic and start talking about all sorts of things. And I was trying to stick with the aggravations I see with 11607.
Okay, but Nellie just joined us, so we will go off topic.
And that's fine. I don't mind, but as long as I can get a few things out. I only have 10 slides, which I thought would work. So I'm going to share, I think this screen. Let's see, let's do screen 1. And I will, hopefully you like my star background.
You are big into the astrosphere.
All of my backgrounds are space and universe as well, Jan. That's funny.
Is that right?
Oh, absolutely. If I could, I'd be out of this medtech industry in a heartbeat and join NASA. But you know, I'm a little old for that.
You're going to say I'd be out of this world.
I'll sign up for a flight to Mars tomorrow.
But we'd never see you again.
I'll see Mars.
Yeah, I have a friend that's actually working on colonies for Mars. So I'm trying to help him with his packaging.
Let me know if they need someone else to sweep the floors.
Okay. Well, anyway, I wanted.
All right, go ahead. We'll start for real. But I will say that I used to dream that I would be going toward Jupiter, and I recognized I'd never, like a Major Tom kind of scenario, but I would see that big red swirly dot. Okay, my videographer is going to be like, where did you want me to start? So, ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for Miss Jan Gates.
Well, I was going to talk about new aggravations, but I realized some of my aggravations are still old aggravations. So I've got the information in there. So it didn't move. How come it didn't move? Oh, there it is. So what are the ISO 11607 standards? They're recognized by the FDA and the EU and are considered the gold standard for packaging sterile medical devices. The thing is, they are actually useful for any kind of medical devices. Unfortunately, because they say sterile, other medical devices don't think they really have to follow it, even though the law says you do. So it's been interesting. We're actually trying to get a non-sterile medical device packaging standard together that actually follows the same thing as what's on these terminally sterilized ones. We just take the sterilization part out of it. Unfortunately, I do belong on the ISO committee, which is the International Organization for Standards. And we've lost the vote on getting enough countries backing the system that we haven't been able to do the standard yet. But anyway, these two standards talk about design and development, which is the -1. And then there's the one for the packaging validations on the production lines in -2. They have recently been amended. So you can see here, they were amended in September of 2023. A lot of these amendments, I'm finding out, amendments or changes in the standards are done because when us packaging engineers go out in the world, we find that people don't understand what they're really supposed to be doing or how to do it. So they're actually revising the standards. It's funny, there's actually a line they put in the 2019 standard because of a problem a big company had with an auditor asking for new stability studies when they weren't necessary. So they put a line in there to make sure auditors don't confuse that anymore. Let's see. Come on. Why are we blinking? Let's get through this. Okay, the good news, the standard title, when it says amendment, means no technical content has been changed. They have just added new requirements to it. The requirements aren't really new. They're for risk assessments, but they actually put in wording that helps you understand how to do risk assessments for packaging. Because I'm finding that a lot of companies don't really understand how the packaging material handling when it comes in, when it's stored, when you pack it, when you put it in the warehouse, when you ship it, when the customer opens it, they don't understand how packaging actually affects the whole product. In medical devices, the sterile barrier for the product is actually considered part of the product. And a lot of companies don't understand that. Without the packaging, you don't have a product you can ship. So the amendments that they've done have added some definitions and a required annex on it on how to do risk assessments. The original 2019 ones are still relevant, but it's really weird. And I have the standard to show you when they make amendments, they change things, but they only put the change on the amendment. They don't have the original document with it. So you actually have to take the amendment in the original document and see where it all fits so you can understand how it changes. Now there's 201 shell documents in those two standards that you're supposed to make sure you comply with. Otherwise, you are not actually using the standard properly. Now there's a few shell statements that a lot of companies don't have to worry about, but then you have to justify why you're not using or going with that shell, because the FDA and the EU and several other countries want you to be using these standards for terminally sterilized medical devices. So there used to be 112, now there's 201. Here's some shell documents. They're in about 33 different areas of what's happening in a company. And some of them we don't actually do as packaging engineers, but we have to point to them when we're finishing up a validation report or you're not complying with the standards. It's interesting how they are using packaging to have a big summary of everything that you're doing with your product. So, I mean, like we have to know that there was a sterilization validation and point to it. There's a lot of quality system requirements, which I put a few of them down here, that we have to be able to point to say that you're actually doing it. It's like the auditors are trying to use us in some ways to show that the product is actually safe, the product and packaging is actually safe. Even these substances of concern, in most regulations and in quality systems, they're not actually considered as part of the product development. But that's where we end up with ROHA and CONEG, which are heavy metals. REACH, where you have to actually say if you've got any substances of concern, if you're bringing it into a country. And it's not just for one product. If you have several products under your name going into a country, you have to consolidate it all so you can tell them how much you might be bringing in so you can pay taxes on it. It's pretty interesting how they've sprinkled all that into the packaging to make sure that it's actually occurring for companies. Some of the, here's the other ones. There some shell statements have to do with PEs, but are often overlooked or completed by specialized PEs. PEs are packaging engineers. And what I mean before specialized packaging engineers, there's groups that actually do serialization. They not only know how to buy the equipment for the printers, but they know how to integrate it into the IT system so that it can be regulated properly. There's PEs that actually work on just equipment purchasing and installation, but they don't have anything to do with the validation of it. So we have to work and make sure that we get these pieces done. There's actually packaging engineers that all they really do is graphics design. And they might come up with a nice looking package, but they don't actually understand shock and vibration storage, shipping, and those aspects that go with it. So we have to make sure we understand what parts need to be done and put it all together so you can make sure you do it properly for the product, a medical device. And these are some other shell statements. I think, no, I just had that. There it is. In the amendment, both of the standards add hazard, process, and risk. The -1, which is the design and development, has added this intended use and purposes and reasonably foreseeable misuse. Now that's a loaded word for a lot of people. How are you going to decide when something you should have known better happens to your product, when somebody misuses it? So this is going to be interesting to see how it all plays out. I have put in here what exactly the wording says and paraphrase it. If it's used wrong, you should have known or predicted it could happen. So you're going to have to watch out for that when you're doing your medical devices. Both of them have restated the test validation work because.
And do you
Yes.
have an example of what a misuse of packaging would be?
I'll show you. I have pictures of a couple of them just after this slide is over.
Okay, perfect.
It's not perfect, but it's blatant examples of where somebody should have known better. And then there can be subtle ones. This big one was changed. This one was changed because a lot of people didn't understand and still don't understand that when you have a test method that's published like ASTM, you have to validate you can actually do that test. And just because it's published doesn't mean you can do the test okay without checking to make sure you can. So they changed the wording, trying to make it stronger. Okay, this page, the next one I have here, shows misuse, and it's a little blatant, and it's not exactly packaging. I thought this was interesting to show how pencils were developed without thinking what happens to them over time. And this kind of thing, if you've got a reusable container, you've got to know that it wears out over time and that you have to be able to keep it clean and not have problems with your product. Over here, we had inhalers that use little tablets that look like pills. What do you think happened? People were taking the pills instead of putting it into the inhaler. This was pulled off the market quickly by the FDA. Because, and at the way the words are written now, people or the company should have known better than to put out a product that used little pills that look like ones that you could take. This is part of why you do human factor testing, because they should be able to help figure out if you've got something that's going to work improperly. I have the next slide because I've always enjoyed this, showing what happens when you don't really look at your product to see how it's going to be used properly. Now, these kids are having fun, but how many are using the slides?
That guy did.
He used the hill, but he didn't use the slide.
Used it to break his fall. That was good.
But anyway, it's something that's we're going to have to look at more and more, and it's a little scary to me on how that's going to be determined. But and even when you're trying to open a sterile barrier so you can get a sterile product out of there, you've got to make sure you understand if that packaging barrier is going to curl up and touch the inside of the package and contaminate the product, or what's going to be going on.
I love that you can make packaging interesting. I really do. I genuinely mean that. David, you had something?
Yeah, I'm unmuted. So Jen, I wonder, is some of that foreseeing misuse, is that directed also towards off-label use, or is it really, I don't know, looking at your examples, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I am not sure on off-label use either. If that's determined to be something that the doctor wants to do, there's not much you can do about it.
It's still my product if the doctor has
and if they are doing that, what I have seen have to happen with a medical device is they have to go and test it that way to prove that it's okay.
If you're talking about the manufacturer, I'd be a bit surprised at how many really test it for every potential off-label use a physician would prescribe.
Yeah, and that's where I hate to say it, that I've learned that you don't always ask the questions.
I didn't hear you, but I'll that story. Thanks.
I'm sorry, you didn't say that there are some questions that should not be asked because you don't want the answer, did you?
No, I'm not going to say that.
Okay.
Well, anyway, going on with this, making sure your packaging is used properly. They are trying to make sure people use it intuitively as much as possible. And when you get into intuition on how to open things and pull them out and use them, it gets a little bit hairy. And that's why you start working with the human factors people that can work through all that. Okay, there was an addition on a normative annex. Normative means it's required. And they put it in for risk management for packaging. And that is one of the biggest problems I have when working with a company on making sure their risk management actually includes packaging, because it could be the materials, it could be how you put them together, it could be how you place the product in your sterile barrier packaging and then put it into a box, because all those kinds of things will affect sterilization if you're not careful, or depending upon what kind of sterilization you're doing. So they've actually added some annexes to help you figure out how to use this risk management for packaging. I went into one company and they had a risk factor of a label not adhering to a bottle. Okay, they were using a bottle, and they said production didn't put it on right. Well, that's not correct. That's not talking about all the risk of what's causing a label to fall off or peel off a bottle prematurely, because it could have something to do with the way it was made, with the machine that's actually doing the application, with the conditions that it's being applied at, whether there was handling of the bottle before you stuck a label on. You've got to put all those risk factors in there and consider them if you're doing something, and how you're going to make sure you don't have that problem when you're trying to run. Yes?
Eddie has something to share, and he's on you. And
yeah, on that point, Jan, some years ago, when I had a different company, I was approached by I think it was Allergan, and they had a drug device combination. The problem they had was that it had to be sterilized, but they were sterilizing it with gamma radiation, and so they did not know how to solve this problem, but they were losing a huge amount of product, because to get the 25 kilogray to the middle of the package on the pallet, they were overdosing so much of the stuff that they were destroying a lot of their own product through the sterilization process.
And that's how you have to make sure. I had a wonderful product I was working with that they thought would be nice because it was going to be flat when they sterilized it, but the product inside actually would move around and clump. And if you over sterilize that, the product was no good anymore. So we had some fun working through. Oh, and then E-beam. I mean, just talking about E-beam. E-beam only penetrates the surface of things. So if you're putting a product in and it's straight like this and you're E-beaming here, you're not going to get back here. So we've got to make sure the packaging is set so it's on its side so it can actually go all the way across and sterilize the product. It gets fun when you're looking at all those pieces, or even ETO. If you don't have the right kind of plastic where the product or the EO can actually go through the plastic, because it's pretty permeable. But if you don't and you've got a closed system, you're not going to be able to get inside to actually sterilize the product inside of that closed system. So there's a lot of things that are going on. I like the fact that they have an informative annex added to the -1, because it gives you the rationale on why you have to do your risk assessments the way you want it to go. I like the quote too, because it is part of the overall risk management process. And there is no benefit to the patient in terms of a positive impact on health from the packaging system without the medical device. Now, when I get to write standards, I don't allow sentences that long. I sort of shorten them up, but I wasn't involved in this because you had to go to Switzerland. I didn't have enough money to go to their meetings.
Michelle has something to share.
Oh, I just thought I just remembered of a recall that was either this week or last week. That's another real life example and current example of foreseeable misuse. And that and I can't remember, I think it might have been Moderna. I can't remember which of the vaccines, but the one that's approved for children 6 months to 11 years old. They had it in single dose vials. And the people administering the vaccines were drawing up the entire quantity of the single dose vial in their syringes and injecting it in the children. And it turns out that the vials had substantially more, is how the FDA described it in the notification, substantially more than the dose requirements. So the kids had been given 2 and 3 times the amount of vaccine that they were supposed to get.
Yeah, that's something they should have thought about. And there are things like that happens. Like I had one company where they had 2 products in a package, and when they would open it to pull the larger one out, the smaller one would fall. Now it fall on the floor, and you had to open a whole nother package system to get that small piece, and then you had to throw away the bigger piece. They should have thought of that. So Sue has a
Yeah, I'm going over human factor studies now, and we're combine we're the good, the bad, and the ugly. We're separating them, and there was one ugly. And as far as packaging, I was looking at other packages, and like frog has to be opened at a certain place, and it's just a simple wording, open here is all you have to do on the packaging. So I'm struggling to have that included on the packaging, because I saw other packages and it just makes sense. So the ugly was what can go wrong, and we were worried about people pulling off the filter before they're injecting, and that was our main concern. I think we fixed that. But there was one nurse, and she didn't have the proper training. The trainer was off that day and was showing her the package, but didn't really show her the filter. And she probably had a long day, or else she's got Alzheimer's. She was trained, left away for an hour, came back, and did not remove the frog, and was injecting into an IV line. And she searched around for ports that would fit the frog. And she finally was able to take this one thing out of a BD, IV bag, and insert it into that port without filtering it. It just amazed me how somebody could be so. She was a NICU, elderly nurse, but it's just how she could not have understood that after these really extensive educational material is beyond me. But if something can go wrong, it goes wrong, and I witnessed it.
Yep. I've been amazed at what I've seen people trying to do with packaging. We are actually developing scenarios where you can go and see how the package might be used in a surgical room on a dummy that's set up like a patient that can actually die if you do things wrong on, with it. Finding nurses and doctors to do it is hard. The biggest surprise to us was emergency vehicles using sterile devices, and how they have to open things because they're holding on with one hand, doing something with the patient the other, and then they have to use their teeth to open up packages. And you need to account for that when you are developing packages that could be used in an emergency rooms or emergency vehicle situation. So it's odd, some of the ways you have to look at this. I did a timeline just so you can see, and what I find amazing, this ISO 11607 standard with the -1 and -2 has been around for 17 years, yet people are still having problems understanding it and doing things with it. If you go back to the original ISO 11607, which is actually fairly close to the -1 and -2. They're just expanded a little bit more to cover the areas better. This thing's been around for 26 years, going on 27 years, and it's still not well understood. All the newer revisions are really tweaking the original standards with language and writing to make sure it's clarified for people. So what I enjoy about the 11607 is it's actually got real people like me, I guess, or other people that are out there, and they're putting inputs in where things are being misunderstood and how it might be stated better to help users of the standard. Auditors, we've had problems with auditors misunderstanding what's in the document, so we tweak that. That usually gets changed quickly. And they are actually developing groups outside of ISO to look into areas that are actually missing from the standard that nobody's thinking about. Or there's things in here like we're not supposed to have to do performance standards, which is like distribution testing, on aged materials because performance is different than a material falling apart. Well, the auditors don't believe it, and they're forcing people to do performance standards on aged materials because there's a possibility they could degrade and act differently at the end of time, end of the use time for them. So they're trying to develop new test methods that can be added in here to show if a material is actually degrading. Because if a material doesn't degrade over time, there's no reason to have to do a performance test, which costs a lot of money and takes a lot of samples to do. So why keep doing it if you don't need to? We've been able to convince auditors that if you've used a packaging system and tested it with aging, all through a particular product life in your company's system of packaging, because every company handles it a little different. Their way they do their sterilization ends up being different, or they might ship it a little different. But as long as you've used one material all the way through and then you start a new product, you can use that same material without doing performance in aging. But if you haven't used that material before, you've got to do performance tests with aging.
Tiger,
And yeah,
Tiger has something.
who?
Unmuted. Perfect.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks, Jen. So I'm an old product development person. So you know, I've developed, I don't know, launched 75 products in my career, but we got surprised with a lot of launches because we failed packaging tests. We failed sealing tests or shake and bake tests. I mean, I failed a shake and bake test 25 times in a row, and it delayed our launch. And so I'm looking for any advice you could give to product development teams on how to work with packaging to sort of simultaneously solve the problems before, you know, a month or two before launch.
Get packaging involved early.
Yeah, I actually try and work with the product development team before the product is developed, because there are things you can do to a product that doesn't really change the product, but it keeps the product shippable and normally aging things. Like I had somebody come to me going, oh, we're going to use it exactly the same kind of package as other ones done, but it's got to be longer. And I look at the product and it's sort of like a 68-inch fishing pole. And I'm going, what are you going to do with this thing? How are you sterilizing it? They're going, well, we're going to ETO sterilize it. And I said, standing up, because it's not, there's no way I can make a package that can actually hold it to stand up 68 inches. They go, no, we're going to lay it down. I said, but pallets are only 48 inches. It won't fit. You can't run things like that through a sterilizer. And if I had been there when they developed this product, I could have told them that. And you don't get packaging involved after you've got a product and say, here's the product, package it. We'll do it, but you're going to end up with issues. I mean, I had one product that kept getting a hole in it, and we evaluated the hole and it was a slit. That wasn't from performance testing. It wasn't from anything the packaging didn't do. We found out the production line was slitting it before it even got to the final packing station. And we packaging engineers had to go out and buy plastic garbage cans for them to put the product into so they wouldn't slit it anymore.
Yeah.
So you need to get somebody that's a little experienced so they can understand and look at your product and tell you things that you might not think of in a packaging sense. I've got a client right now I'm a little worried about because of the way they want to put their product together. All I can see is bacteria getting into the sterile product. So I'm asking for certain tests, and that isn't even packaged yet to ship.
Yeah, Jan David, I just wanted to comment that this concept, it shouldn't be a concept. Talk early, involve your experts. You know, I mean, we hear it with FDA pre-meetings. If you're confused, call the FDA and make sure you're on the right track, that they don't have objections. If you're designing your packaging, talk to your packaging engineer. If you don't have one, get a consultant. You know, if you need to validate, if you don't understand the differences in sterilization mechanisms, reach out to some expert, and they're often in-house. But I think for this whole team, it's a great lesson to use the resources that are available to you or find new ones. Thanks.
And that was my next slide.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's okay. It's wonderful. The companies develop products without packaging considerations. So there's materials you've got to worry about. I was that 68-inch long fishing pole I was talking about. I'm going, can we ETO sterilize, can we radiation sterilize that thing, because my packaging will survive. It'll fit into the carrier case without you having to worry about the product flexing and having some problems. And they looked at it and they had a plastic in there that would turn into hydrochloric acid if they put it through radiation sterilization. So working with the people and making sure that you've got the right materials for sterilization. The packaging people have actually had to learn a lot about that to make sure the packages didn't fall apart. Have you ever seen a case go through ETO sterilization and they didn't use the right hot melt on the manufacturer's joint? The whole thing falls apart and your cases start collapsing. So we've had to learn a lot and work through some of these. The incomplete risk assessments for packaging, if you don't have those defects in there, we can't figure out a sample size. And that's a law. We have to have a statistically relevant sample size. And that comes out of the risk assessments. Then we have inconsistent classifications for defect severities. That is a problem. So I've put in some of these things that what happens, like I need to know your product size, what kind of fragility it has, so that I can figure out how to package it properly. How are you going to ship it? There's a difference between 2-day and regular FedEx shipping. Or if you're going to do pallet loads in trucks going somewhere, there's a different way of testing those things. So we have to know how you're going to be shipping it. They try and run everything at for accelerated aging at a temperature that's higher than what you should be doing for labels or boxes and stuff. So we got to make sure there's enough time and you evaluate what you're doing. And then you've got to understand, we're not human factor engineers or specialists. Packaging engineers aren't graphic designers. We're not regulatory people, and we're not IT people. And that bothers people. Now, sometimes if you're in the field long enough, you learn some of these things, but that isn't how we're trained. Here's some improvements. Some old and some new. More companies do seem to be understanding that the product cannot be sent to where it needs to go safely without packaging. It doesn't just happen. We've experienced packaging engineers actually develop the terminally sterilized medical device packaging standard, but it helps for more than that. As I said, there are some PE groups out there that are being organized to study and develop test methods that are missing. Most of them are not recognized by regulators, auditors, or users. They are being considered though, and worked on because we know it's going to cause an issue. So what is one of those? Do you know from the time you take a product out of a case to when it's actually used, there's storage, there's handling, there's opening, and we don't always know what's happening or how it's doing. I've got some wonderful pictures where sterile barrier materials or products were put on the bottom of a wire shelf in a hospital where they mopped the floors, and there was nothing between that wire rack and that sterile barrier. That seems a little bit rough to us.
I know about some national security secrets that were stored in a box in a bathroom.
Yes. Well, we haven't seen that too bad. They are putting these UV sterilizing boxes into hospitals where they're putting product in there, and they're exposed to UV for 24 hours because it cleans the outside and makes it sterile. Well, those things are sitting in there for days. Do you know that nobody's actually tested materials or product for that? We use in most packaging materials for sterile barrier packaging, we don't put UV inhibitors and other additives into the product because it can migrate into, into the packaging because it can migrate into the product, which means that that stuff's going to fall apart and they're going to pull it out of there and it's not going to be actually sterile, even though they think it is because it's in that UV light. So we're trying to have people study those situations, see how much is being used and what we can do about it, and make our packaging work better. So I had questions. And of course, I always have my, I had my contact, but I forgot to change my.
You're not based there anymore.
I know, I forgot to change that.
Where in this great universe do you live now? Jan?
I am working on that. So
you can tell us, you can give us the
Camas, Washington. I got tired of 120-degree temperature in the in our Temecula on my back porch in the summer for a few days in a row, and decided Washington was a much better place to live, which you agree with too, but I'm 3 hours south of you.
Yes, I do like that. I was in Olympia this weekend, by the way. Eddie, I saw that our Netherlands-based friend who can't be on camera today, Luke Hyben, had a comment, and you wrote in the Q&A that you would like to address this live. Would you address his point?
Where is this Q&A?
Dr. Lynn.
Yeah, you scared me, Joe. I was like, what are you talking about?
Too,
I didn't say anything.
Sorry. Dr. Lynn is having some muting issues. There we go.
What was the question, Joe?
Well, maybe you clicked the wrong button, but Luke wrote, what I've learned from Bijan is that misuse is always well intended, else it is abuse. And you wrote, Edward Lynn would like to answer this question live.
Oh, that's purely by accident. I had no idea that.
I should have assumed user error. That's my bad. I've been at this long enough, I should have known.
So Joe, getting around that user error so we don't all remember that who caused it. I wanted to just on Jen's last comments about UV and the operatory suite. So the end of that little story is that the manufacturer, who doesn't even know that the hospital is exposing their products to all this extra UV. And in my case, I had trouble with vaporized hydrogen peroxide. They would bring in
And who doesn't?
Oh yeah, they'd bring a machine in and bomb the room, to kill MRSA or whatever else. That caused one of my own products to crumble and fall apart. That leads to a recall. That leads to manufacturer's problems. Talk about Jan's earliest unknown things that can happen. But although the hospital in any case is treating your product, exposing it to UV or vaporized hydrogen peroxide, it becomes the manufacturer's recall. It becomes the manufacturer's big problem, beyond loss of money and loss of market and everything else. And they had nothing to do with it. Just a side comment.
Well, that's why we're trying to study when we find out things like that. We try and find out who's doing it, when they're doing it, how they're doing it. Because if they can, I've understanding the surgical rooms are spraying hydrogen peroxide around a lot these days. Well, if they can do it before we bring in the instruments, it wouldn't be a problem. But I mean, that actually makes some of the sterile barrier systems, the packaging materials fall apart too.
Yep.
And
But
you
but
can't
some,
call it.
and some of and a big piece of the problem is the hospitals are storing product in the operatory suite for convenience. I need catheter, I need X. The nursing runner grabs it in that room. They don't go out in the hallway. So if they have to bomb this room with UV or VHP, your products, which are sitting there, will get exposed. So personally, when I was at Cook, we had a problem with VHP, led to a big recall. And I took it to FDA as soon as I started getting rumblings. And the branch chief at the time went to the engineering teams at FDA, at OSO, I guess, and they said, "We've heard something about this. Tell us more." And we got quite involved with the engineering side, and I don't remember ever seeing any kind of real comments from the agency, but it is a problem. I wasn't aware, as you stated, that they're doing UV in the rooms, but it makes a ton of sense.
Yeah, they're doing UV in the rooms and these cabinets that are holding the product. And
Yep.
I mean, it doesn't affect just packaging. It's going to affect the products, like you're saying. And
Yep.
we've got to, that's why we try and work in the original design and understand and map out what you're doing so that we can actually make sure we have the right packaging to protect the product so it can actually be used the way you want it.
And in the end of the story for me, we recreated packaging. We sterilized our product in ethylene oxide. Then we put it into an over bag of aluminum foil. I don't know the composition of the foil. And we had labels all over the thing that looked like, warning signs in black and yellow. Open this end. The outside of the inner package is not sterile. Don't put it into the field. Open it on the table. So trying to keep track of that and prevent that. And to my recollection, we didn't have any problems of anybody entering the sterile field with the interior package, because in the inside, the foil was a double Tyvek. Normally what you would open and the sterile one would reach in and pull it. So we were really careful, lots of vetting with the agency to make sure they agreed with our concepts, and it went forward.
Yeah, that was part of a problem that we found, and we actually added information that we're training nurses to now on
Yep.
where the sterile barrier is and how you're supposed to be using it. But it's actually on the labeling, and it's supposedly supposed to be used by these different nurse organizations. So
Sure. Good.
we're working through some of those issues, but it takes a while.
Oh, it
And
takes.
yeah, that was in the 2019 revision of that ISO 11607-1.
Right. Yeah. I'm quite familiar with those standards.
Good.
How much reading, Jan, is involved in staying current with your side of the world? I feel badly for Michelle Lots of the world, and all of anything from FDA at all needs to be consumed. How much of that is, I know that packaging is part of the product, so theoretically everything, but realistically, how much do you have to consume to stay current? Ms. Gates.
I'm not following what your question is. How much do I have to consume of the regulations and standards and everything?
Yeah, how many guidances and updates and things
I've never actually counted them, but I have a 14-page handout of FDA guidances, ISO documents, ASTM standards, and with that I think are useful.
Oh, please share with the group, and we can put it on premium for people to download.
Okay, I can do that. Some of them are not applicable for everything,
Sure.
but it's very useful. I actually work on ASTM committees for packaging. We have what's called a D10 and FO2 groups that work on exterior packaging, environmental testing and stuff, and then the interior packaging for sterile barrier systems or other flexible barriers and closure systems for packaging. And I'm also on the ISO committee for the US on their packaging standards. So
Tiger, I think you'll agree this young lady should be a future Bone Chat featured guest for your folks to learn a thing or two that they didn't know.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Mark, you and your pals are our featured guests next week. What are we going to be learning?
QRX Partners is a team focused on regulatory and quality, and Mark Swanson will be talking about risk and risk-based approaches. So so yeah.
yay.
To be continue.
Please add packaging.
Okay, good. I'll do that.
Well, you know, you guys are both on the network, so make a point, Mark, of reaching out to Jan and maybe show your presentation in advance, and she can say, like, what happened to 11607? I don't see that on there.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay. So
all right.
that's what's in store for next week. And between now and then, I wish you all safety and happiness and health. And I'll see you next week. Thanks, everyone. Bye now. Thank you, Jan.